So we're going to take a few minutes now that we understand a little more about IP routing, and we're going to talk about routing protocols. Now, as you've seen, routers normally only know about directly connected networks. You'll see those in the routing table if you do show IP route with a C designation next to them showing that they are connected networks. And by default, routers can only route between these two directly connected networks. Now you can add a default route or the gateway of last resort so that if a router doesn't know where to send the traffic, i.e. if it's not on one of its locally connected networks, it will send it to the router that you've designated as the default gateway. Now you can help this out some with static routes, but as we'll see in the next video, static routes are evil and should be destroyed with fire, and they're not really useful on large networks because you have to go manually update them, and I won't hash over all of that. You'll see that in the next video. So since we don't want to have static routes everywhere, routing protocols can be used to help fill in the routing table on routers. And how does it do this? It allows routers to dynamically advertise the networks they know about across the wide area network or the local area network. It allows routers to talk to one another and say, hey, I know about these networks. Now let's look at a small example. Let's say we have a network like so. And I've used computers here to denote local area networks, but you can consider them to be local networks with multiple computers on them. Now, if you're using a dynamic routing protocol, then this router advertises the fact that, hey, I know about this network here, and it advertises it to these two routers, which then eventually makes it up to this one, so that if this network wants to send traffic to this network, it'll take this path down here because it is the shortest. And for the purposes of this little demonstration, we're assuming that all of these links are of equal speed, and so the difference in the link speed does not come into play. Obviously, with the more advanced routing protocols, that does come into play, but at least for RIP, which is the main routing protocol you have to be worried about for the ICND1, hop count is about all it takes into account. So let's say this network's going along well and good, and suddenly this link between these two routers goes down. Well, if you had a static routed network and you didn't have a dynamic routing protocol, that means you'd have to go into this router and you'd have to tell it, don't send your traffic this way, you're going to send it up through this guy. And this router here has to be told, you can send your traffic this direction, but you can't ever send it back this direction because there's not a link between this router and this router. However, if you're using a dynamic routing protocol, then this router here advertises the fact that, hey, this link has gone down to these other two remaining routers. This router then advertises the route back down to this guy and says, hey, if you want to get to this network, you have to come through me because your link to that network is down. So as you can see, having a dynamic routing protocol can really help you out with both healing the network if a link failure does occur, and also distributing the routes to all of your remote networks so that everybody agrees on the best way to get to that remote network. Now we're going to discuss the two major types of routing protocols, but before we do that, we have to learn one term that's used when you're talking about dynamic routing protocols, and that is convergence. Convergence is when all the routers in a routed network agree upon the state of the network. They all realize that certain links are up and certain links are down. Certain links have a faster speed than others, and so on and so forth. Now, different routing protocols have different ways of handling convergence. RIP, by default, broadcasts out its entire routing table every 30 seconds. So its convergence time is rather high because if a link goes down, you have to wait for that next update to be sent out that says, hey, I don't know where this network is anymore. It's no longer directly connected to me. And it has to spread across the network. Whereas link state protocols, like OSPF, will broadcast out a link state change whenever a link goes down. And I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but convergence is one of the major factors that's taken into account when you're deciding a routing protocol. Basically, how quickly do you want the network to be able to heal itself? And a network is said to be fully converged, again, when all routers agree on the state of the network. We'll pick up our discussion of routing protocols in the next video.